Everyone,
Hello.
welcome. Welcome to this session. It's going to be about 45 minutes long. And just to be clear, what we're doing is sort of like a mini concentrated version of a workshop on impact and storytelling, which lasts about 3 hours. So we've done our best to try and give you a sort of the kind of edited highlights, which hopefully gives you sort of introduction to how we do things and some things to kind of take away and to kind of think about. We're going to talk to a presentation, obviously, and we're really happy to send you the presentation if you want to kind of use it and take away, so don't feel like you've got to kind of scribble lots and lots of notes. So bear with us, because this is kind of slightly smaller and shorter and speedier than we would normally work. But hopefully you'll get, you'll get a reasonable kind of introduction to the subject and what we do. So just to say, I'm Ben, and Gerald, can you just say hello quickly? Some of you already met. So we'll do proper introductions in a minute. And I'm just going to share my screen. It's obviously a glitch from. So this is our mission. To help people and organisations flourish by being more creative and clearer about the purpose, and by telling a better story about what they do. And we do this through consultancy, coaching, workshops and bespoke training programs. These are just the kind of what we're going to talk you through today. So the aims of this specific session, we're going to talk about our organisational stories. So the organisations that we've run and we've worked with, and how we've kind of related to sort of evaluation data and impact data in them. We're going to have a discussion about why we think stories are important in articulating or impact. Different kinds of data, like quantitative and qualitative, and how stories can kind of relate to those. We're going to give you some tips and a bit of homework, and just to say, we're going to share the presentation with everybody, so don't feel like you've got to take loads and loads of notes. You'll get all of the stuff on all of the slides. And as I've said, this is part of a bigger, longer workshop, so we'll talk a bit about those workshops at the end. Gerald, do you want to just introduce yourself and your organisational story?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm glad to have you here. So my name is Gerald Richards. As you can tell, I'm American. I moved here about 3 years ago to Edinburgh to start and help start a charity called the Superpower Agency, which is based on a charity that I ran in the States called 826 National, which is a network of creative writing and after-school tutoring centers located in now 9 cities in the US. And we had a model where we had storefronts and creative storefronts that fronted our creative writing centers. So the storefront where we began in San Francisco was a pirate supply store, and it sold supplies for working pirates. They kind of exist. So working pirates, but it was through a secret door. The kids would then go into the back to our tutoring center. And we did this work at our center and in schools. And I came on board as the CEO of the national organization about 7 or 8 years after the organization had started and then been growing. And so I was tasked at that point to how do we tell the story of our organization that's separate from our founder. Our founder was a famous writer, is a famous writer. Dave Eggers, you know him. And so how do you tell the organization story and a national story about the organization that does not rely on him? Right? And why he started and how he started. And so it was a big deal to sort of transfer over to where we started talking about the impact of the organization rather than why it was started, what was the effect we were having on the young people we worked with year after year. And we worked with, across the country, 30,000 young people a year. And that was something about 16,000 volunteers that was working with us. So we really need evaluation and research and evaluation to help us show our impact and be able to weave that in to our organizational story to show funders and schools and new communities where we were growing why they should work with us, why they should fund us, what was the impact of the work we were doing.
Thank you. And just a bit about me. So Gerald and I met because about 10 years ago, I was inspired by this American model to set up a similar organisation in East London called the Ministry of Stories. And as I say, that's been going about 10 years. And we set it up completely from scratch. So it was just me and Lucy, who's the woman you can see in this picture, and a bunch of very willing and brilliant volunteers who got inspired by this idea and kind of made it happen in Hoxton. And I put this picture up because this is us on our launch day, which is almost exactly 10 years ago, because as Gerald alluded to, one of the key parts of this sort of model is the writing centre exists, but it's behind a shop for fantastical creatures. And the children in East London decided they wanted their shop to be a shop for monsters. And so we had the shop on the front, which is called Hoxton Street Monster Supplies, and the Ministry of Stories behind, which is all great, except that it creates quite a difficult story to sort of articulate, basically. So for some funders and some people, it was quite a complicated thing to do. And initially we had to sort of rely on this American version, and then we had to get much better about telling our own story. And using things like theory of change and impact models and things like that were a really, really key part in us being able to tell our own story and to do it in an effective way that makes sense to people who weren't necessarily completely turned on by all the creative whimsy of these kind of ideas, but wanted to know that it actually worked and it had an impact on children's literacy and creativity and ability to write. Is there anything else you want to add, Gerald, to that? Or
no, I think the big part is trying to figure out, right? Because you don't want to not tell the founder story, but you do want to be able to talk about the effects of the work. And I think the storefronts were always a hard one because people, as Ben said, some people completely buy into the whimsy and they love it. And sometimes with the storefront, you had to be there to see it, to understand how both things work. So then being able to tell a story in that, say if you went to go see a funder, I'll tell a story later, but I'll tell it now, but going to see a funder and pitching what we were doing and having him stop and go, I wouldn't lead with that information. And us sitting back and going, okay, this is either going to go horribly wrong or we're going to learn something. Luckily, he was great because he then talked to us about how we should frame what we're doing and what we should be doing and what was interesting. I mean, in his eyes, as we started the research and evaluation and started really putting together the question, he was like, I need to know, how do you know it works? Right? The story and the founder and all of that is great, but if you're asking me for a large sum of money, which we are, we need to know, how is this working and how do you know it works and how can we prove it when we go back to people and when we go back to our trustees and say, this is why we're funding this. This is what we're seeing.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. Okay, so you were invited, I think, to have a think about this as an exercise. So you're at a networking event where you meet a prospective funder. You know that both you and they will want to meet many other people during this event. You have a minute to talk about the impact of your organization. What do you say? Now, we do this exercise in a much slightly more expanded form in the longer workshop, but we just wanted to invite people, if they wanted to and they were brave enough, to give this a go. We're going to time you. And we're going to give you a bit of feedback, and we're not going to expect you to be absolutely perfect because that would be silly, but we just want to invite people to give it a go, and we will time you and let you know when your minute has gone, and then we will provide a bit of feedback on how you did. So is there anybody in the room who's willing to give it a try? We actually had quite a few people in the last one, so that was great, but is there anybody here who would like to give this a go?
So I'm going to keep my camera off. That's how I'm dealing with the fear.
That's absolutely fine.
So at a minute, I'm timing it. At a minute, you will see the finger. I usually call it the finger of doom, but it's the finger of love today and pumpkin pie. So
it's a Thanksgiving finger, is it?
The Thanksgiving thing going. So whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Let's give thanks. Hello, my name's Vari McGee. I work for the Here Equality and Human Rights Network. and we're London's network of voluntary sector organisations, civil society that works on human rights and equality. And we also have loads of experts by experience, people with lived experience of kind of poverty and discrimination in our network as well. And what we do is we try and connect up those individuals and those organisations in solidarity to talk about issues that are pan-equality and intersectional, where kind of pragmatic, pan-equality, rights-based approaches can create genuine social change for London. Have you got any questions, Mr. Funder? Or Mrs. Funder? Or unmarried Funder?
We're like the inclusivity of that one.
That was 40 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you could have had a little bit longer if you wanted. Gerald, what would be your response to that?
I think towards the end, did you make an ask besides what my question was?
No. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so that would be my one thing. I think you got to, like, especially because you got it to 40 minutes and you talk about what you do and the impact of it, that you could then make, what do you need? Or what would you like me to do with that information? Or what would you need from me?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Should I try that? So what we could really do with is sustainable core costs that would enable us to really make our network, particularly work in times of emergency, like it's been shown during the pandemic, so that we're sustainable and ready to go and hit the ground running. Is that something you could do?
Not me personally, but that was good. That was good. I think making sure, I think for everyone I think sometimes we tell the story and then forget that you've got that minute and that person either is going to stop and go, or they're going to ask you questions, or they're going to say, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk more about it. So how do you get them? What's the hook? How do you get them to ask you more questions?
Well, one of the things I would say, and I think I'm being a little bit harsh here, but I'm just it's very tempting to talk about all the things that you do, as Gerald said, but it can be harder, but a better discipline to think about what the change is that you want to see in the world. So not talk about activities, but actually talk about impact and change. Mm-hmm. That is a really helpful way of not feeling like you've got to rush to fill in all of the different activities that you're up to, which we're going to be, will take up more than a minute, more than 20 minutes probably. So I would be tempted to sort of frame it in a slightly different way.
Yeah. No, and I take that on board. We're working towards a CRM in-house as well, and we're having a similar kind of conversation, and it's just trying to embed. You're so used to selling what you do, particularly to kind of beneficiaries, and it's just trying to think, actually, what is the impact, what is the change that we're making? So thank you for that reminder.
So at the end, we've got a slide which is a series of questions that you can use to think about this, which we would make part of a longer exercise, but those might be helpful for you to think about that in that way.
Cheers.
Okay, was there someone else who wanted to give this a go?
I'd give it a go.
Fantastic. Okay, are you ready to time, Gerald?
I will be. Okay.
So if you can imagine a space near your house, and just imagine it like it's really bare and you walk past it every day, and it's got the opportunity to be a really beautiful green space. That's kind of what Bankside Open Spaces Trust does, is find those spaces that are in your urban centre that could bring you a little bit of joy every day. And they empower people to protect those spaces and transform them. And we look after them as well. And so we have a network of volunteers that does that. And so what we are asking for is sort of sustainable cost to protect these spaces, so that we have the kind of clout to make sure that when planning decisions are made, open spaces are protected, and that we can support our local communities with funding, ongoing gardening supplies. And people don't realise that those little green spaces that bring you a joy can really cost you money, and do require core costs every year. And that's just what we want to do, is bring joy and empower people through green space in an urban setting.
That was great. That was only just over a minute, right? Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Gerald, what was your response to that?
I thought it was good. You hooked me in when you had sort of when you had put me in the space of like walking by, right? Because we all walk by spaces where you think like it'd be nice. What's this abandoned thing, or what's this open space where nothing is, where you could be? So I think having people imagine what something could look like and what the end result would be of their work. I would say if you could bring it back around to that, so the person see, because you make the ask then, and the ask comes back around to like, now that space that you just walked by looks like this, and this is what this does for you.
Yeah, definitely showing that change. So, you know, take them on a journey from what it looked like paint a mental image of what it looked like at the beginning and then what you've done by the end. And I guess interestingly, related to the other, I slightly missed what it is that you actually do. So, so, you know, are you taking volunteers in to kind of make these spaces right? How do your programs work? You could just do that through like telling a little story of a beneficiary, like a community or a volunteer that's done something. And that would just kind of help to illustrate and make that connection between the change and how that change happens. Okay.
Sure, I'll have a go.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
I hate this, which is why I'm making myself do it. I'm not very good at this. So I'm Julie, I'm from Orpington Football Club, and we are all about football in the community. We want everyone who loves football to come and develop their skills with us. Children improve their physical, mental, and team skills by working with us. Not only do we support the children, but we support their families through developing a community of friendship and activities and social events that really has replaced some people's extended family and lack of services that don't exist in Bromley anymore. We support Gaddington Park. We maintain our pavilion and the pitches, and we are going to be building a £1.2 million new community pavilion. So we would love, if you want to join us to play football, to volunteer, to donate money, or to come have a coffee in our new community center, please come join us.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was exactly a minute, like you timed it. Gerald?
I would say for your ask for one thing.
Okay.
I think I would say if you give them multiple things, everyone takes the path of least resistance.
Okay.
If you tell me all I have to do is come to your station, I have to come to the football club.
Coffee.
Great.
Yeah.
I don't give any money. I don't have to volunteer. Right. So I would say that, because I think then, especially because you've already put, this is how much it is and how much we need. If you ask for a dollar amount, then it's like, great, someone knows they're putting towards something. Because I think the beginning part of that, the football club, because I'm not a football person, but to understand what that plays in the community and how important that is. I think to your point when you said it replaces people's families, in some ways it helps people, it creates a sense of family for a lot of people. That's incredibly important. And so that, I think, is that, I think, if for the line, if you look for the tagline for you, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Well, we say there's a kind of quite a useful thing that you can do that can be a useful hook about what your personal story or your relationship between the organization and its mission is. And it's really a useful thing sometimes to just articulate that, because it helps to kind of make that connection with someone. Or it's a question that I would ask, because it's intriguing. It brings you into the organization in an interesting way. Okay, thank you very much for doing that. I know it's not the easiest thing to jump people into. So we just wanted to talk a bit about why you think stories are important in kind of articulating the mission of your organization. So does anybody have any sort of things that they want to contribute to answer this question? Why are stories important? How are they effective?
I think they connect to us emotionally, don't they? So through a story, you can really connect with your emotions as opposed to just stats that are quite cold.
Yeah, exactly. Great. What else? Why are they why are they effective and useful and important?
Because it makes it real, and you know, on some level it will resonate with people, you know, if it's a real story.
Yeah, we had a nice contribution in the last session actually, which is it's actually quite a cunning way to you know, introduce what you need to talk about. If you're going to say, if you just say, I'm going to tell you a story about something, it doesn't feel like you're going to be pitched.
Yeah.
Even it might be. So yeah, absolutely. I saw Lucy's hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a social research and data person, so I suppose this is my kind of geeky take on it. But I think you know, that there's a lot of there's preoccupation, especially within the kind of civil society sector, with demonstrating impact with kind of, you know, hard figures and boring looking graphs. And I think sometimes stories can really put a human face on that data, and in that way, it can make it a lot more compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree. Okay, so thank you for those contributions. These are just our little packaged list of them. So we talk about stories as packaged wisdom. So they're a way of kind of packaging up what can be kind of quite complicated information in a way that's really easily digestible and accessible. So if you can think of a story that can kind of put together that information, it just means that it's much more easy for the person who's listening to it to kind of make sense of it and understand it. As we said, they can create connection and empathy, which is really important if you're talking about impact on people and human beings, even if, you know, there will be a requirement for the kind of hard data and the hard statistics. It's really important to make that emotional connection. We think this is really important, that stories are about change. So things always move in stories, the narrative develops and everything. So they can be a really useful way of articulating change. And that can mean change in its own terms. So it doesn't have to be like massive earth-shattering shifts, because maybe the people you're working with or supporting, change for them can be quite a small thing. But actually a story is a really useful way of making that point, that change can be small, but it can be a really big thing for a participant. They inspire action. So we always say, you know, have the ask, have the call to action at the end of your story, because they can be a really useful way of motivating people like volunteers or funders to kind of get involved and to be part of the story going forward from where you are. So always think about what it is that you want somebody to do with the information or the story that you're telling. And we talk about this as well, this sort of idea that you may have a good idea behind your charity, and that stories about the impact that you're having are a really brilliant way of developing that idea, helping you understand it better and helping other people understand it. So there's a kind of mutually symbiotic relationship between, you know, a good idea behind a charity, the stories it produces, and the stories themselves also then helping to develop that idea. Okay, back to you, Gerald, on data.
So back to the funder who almost crushed my dreams by telling us that, you know, we're you know, I don't lead with that, but how do you know it works? We then went back to our organization, went back to 826, and in essence created a research and evaluation department, and started to think about what were the types of data we needed to collect, what did we want to know, what would people want, not just, I think, one, what we wanted to know, and what could we collect. And quantitative data is usually the easiest, right? The number of people who come into your program, the number of people that are coming into your workshops, the number of people who are coming in the door, the number of volunteers you work with, the number of schools you work with. But then we also use that quantitative data to look at how many students were starting with our programs and how many students were ending with our programs. How many volunteers were we retaining? How many hours were young people spending with our volunteers, or how many hours were people spending in the spaces that we're working with or in our school programs. So thinking about ways of using the quantitative data to show change over time. And then the qualitative data, we started with pre-workshop surveys and then post-workshop surveys to look and to track, and that they were asking questions like, do you feel confident in your writing? Do you feel your writing's improving because of our workshops? Do you feel it's easier to do your homework because you work with us? Ways that the students could talk about how they were feeling about the impact of the work we were doing in a way that they understood, and then actually asking those questions of the parents and asking those questions of the teachers, so we could then triangulate different information that the qualitative information we were collecting around the students to display impact. Think about case studies, and that would be either written or video, as it says next, stories about people who are participating with you. Sometimes the best people to talk about the work you're doing isn't us. It's usually the participants that we work with. It's usually the beneficiaries of the work that we do. And case studies are great ways, especially video case studies, are great ways to show that impact in their own words. And the theory of change, if you have this, or if you're thinking about it, if you've never heard it, we, in our session, go into it more, but it's how the change that you're taking, that your work is doing over time. Where are the young people starting? Where are you hoping that they end through the work that you're doing?
No, I think you were going to show your websites at this point.
If Ben was not here, I would not remember that.
Okay, so I'm going to.
And so, if everyone can see the screen now, I'm going to show you, this is the 826 national impact page that we created after we'd done, and this is probably done after a number of years of work, because we had been doing our own internal evaluation, our own internal research, and then we got a funder to support us getting an external evaluator to look at the work we were doing. And then we put all that in, took all of that, and in essence put it on our website to be able for people to easily find our stories of impact and what was happening. So on our website at the beginning is the external evaluator, Arbor consulting partners, talking about what they saw in our space and what their evaluations pulled in about our space. And then we back that up with our quantitative data. So the number of students we worked with every year, the number of publications we were producing, the number of teachers we were serving, to show that we were collecting, that we were actually scaling the work that we're doing. Because if you look at it year over year, it kept growing. So you're looking at growth over time, and people are being able to say, how are you getting bigger? Are you growing? Is this having an impact on more young people? And then we used our theory of change boiled down to these three things that we were looking at: academic gains, social and emotional gains, and communication gains in the young people that we were working with. And we put that on our website so that people can see this. We could be very transparent about what we were looking at and what we were hoping to achieve with our work. And then using our survey data results and putting it in, at least into a way that was much more emotional, but actually showed and was a visual representation of the survey data that we were getting, so that people could see the impact of, so that people could see the impact. It's all back to impact and evaluation. But I think this was a great way for people to look and say, oh, I can see what the students are saying, what the parents are saying, and what the teachers are saying about the work. And then we added on here, and I don't know if they still have here are some of our video. We worked with a videographer to take videos of case studies that were about, we did one about a teacher. We did one about one of our staff members who'd been with us for 10 years and asking her what she saw over her time. We also did one of our volunteers and another with one of our students. So these video case studies in their own words became really powerful tools for us to be able to send out. And if we couldn't be there to talk to a funder, we could send these videos out. And in their own words, our participants and the people we worked with could talk about what we were doing. I don't think we have time to show super agency, so we'll skip that one. We'll just go.
What questions does this bring up for people as we're sort of talking about this or showing this?
May I ask about kind of anonymized storytelling or private storytelling, and whether that kind of has any impact or not? I mean, we're second tier, as I said, but many of our members might work with people fleeing domestic abuse or trafficking, or who are going through the asylum process or have mental health support needs, and they've got really, really important stories to tell, but they maybe might not want to be on film or have their voice or their name on something. Yeah. Does that still work?
That still works. That still works. I think, and if people know the populations you work with and who you're working with, then they'll know that that's not information, that it will have to be anonymous because of who you work with. As long as people know that up front, that this is either someone else. I think we had one video, it's another organization I was on the board of. We did a representation. It was, like we said in the video, that this was someone's story. It was an actor relaying that person's story, but also to have, I think, that anonymous information is still useful information.
But some way of this, it's worth having some way of kind of still humanizing that, like whether it's as an actor or maybe an avatar or a film of something that's important to them.
Exactly.
Or is a face or a person more effective than like, oh look, this is their, I don't know, prayer mat, or is it more important to kind of have a face, do you think?
I don't think you need a face. I think a face is helpful, but I think you could do a representation. Like I said, if it's a prayer mat and the story is around that and it's a voiceover about it, I think that's still important because it's still a visual representation of something that's important to that person.
Got you. Cool. Thanks.
Piece of their story.
We've done some pairing of stories with kind of objects. That the prayer mat was one, but clothes are often things as well. I think they're quite powerful.
Definitely.
And a really good way of being personal, but without revealing somebody.
Yeah.
And an object is a fantastic way of making a story concrete. You know, we often use the idea of bringing an object or having an object as a way of talking about things that is still about the thing, but is in some way kind of creates a bigger meaning around it. So I think it's a really creative way of thinking about that issue, even if you're not necessarily always talking about anonymizing it. It's a really interesting way into talking about organizations or the people that you're working with. Sorry, we've got a few. Yes, there's a point, they have to be ready on their storytelling journey. So, you know, that's completely right. You can't sort of push people into doing this. It needs to be something that they really understand what the context is, what you might be using it for. So that's a really important thing. And then they're ready to kind of talk about it as well. Sorry, was somebody else there wanting to make a point or ask a question?
I think one of the things that I really liked about your website is the way actually you're sort of like really upfront and out there with your figures. So when you sort of scroll down through, that's like really quite impressive. That sort of information tends to be hidden in our annual reports. And once we publish an annual report, actually it might be some figures that we then throw out, you know, and they go out through our social media channels about impact and stuff like that. But actually, you know, for us, it becomes sort of quite old news. And because there are so many other streams that you're juggling or dealing with, they tend to be figures that get forgotten about because actually you've ticked that box and okay, now it's next. So I just really liked the way that sort of like showcased and actually quite impactful, because actually, you know, funders or people that you come across, one of the first places they go to is actually they have a quick, like, you know, scoot around your website. So actually, you know, it's quite a really good, strong impression.
Exactly. Yeah, I think when we put it out there, we were realizing we were like you, is like we put all the numbers that were in our report or they were in things we're talking about, but putting it out there made them more real. And like I said, then we're finding out funders we all knew, but when the funder would talk to us and say, suddenly start bringing up our own numbers to us in meetings, we're like, you are paying attention to the website. We got to keep this up to date. Okay.
You know, that's really good. And, you know, I think the other thing being is because you're so used to doing it, you quite often get stuck in that sort of like tunnel vision of the way, because that's how you always do it. So actually, you know, things like that just actually give you that sort of like bit of a wake up call. So that's really useful. Thank you.
I was just wondering about gathering those case studies, like particularly the qualitative data. Did you have to train volunteers to do it? Do you have like one staff member responsible? I'm just thinking, you know, like in my very small charity, it kind of falls to me, and and currently I'm working 7 hours a week thanks to furlough. So it's a bit. So I'm just wondering about how the process of collecting that data.
Yeah, so for the organization I run now, I'm like you, I'm the person collecting the data. So I do the surveys, the pre-survey, and I do the post-survey. And then I pull in some volunteers help me pull together and just sort of like pull together the numbers of the information that we do. Usually I had it was a staff person that did it, primarily because I think it was a bridge too far to ask the volunteers. And it was good as the staff were involved in it, because I think what winds up happening, especially sometimes in creative organizations, the staff are like, well, why are we taking this data? Why are we collecting this? We're a creative organization, we're fun. We don't want to make it non-fun if we collect the data. But then for them to understand the importance of it and the need for it. And so having them do do the sort of collecting of the data then allowed, and to be able to explain it to the young people about why we were collecting the data, why we were doing the surveys, was really helpful to them to understand when we had the information for them, what it was, because they were part of the gathering of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah.
We go back to
Sorry, can I just put one question? Because Hasmita is in quite a noisy room, and she said, what tools did you use to measure soft skills, and how did you decide what tools to measure? How did you decide what tools to measure?
How do we decide what to measure? So we had we asked our evaluators what we should be thinking about measuring, and there are ways to do it, especially for the soft skills. One was they were talking about we could do, and we did sometimes video recording, so asking the kids questions on video around that. We did our questions, we made our surveys very short, and so we were all on paper, and we kept them very short, because I think when we started, the first survey we did was 40 questions. And if you're trying to ask a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, or 12-year-old 40 questions, they answered maybe 5. So we got to maybe asking 5 or 6 questions, and really sort of questions framed in a way to give us, to sort of that we would understand the data we were collecting. So we started asking about confidence. We started being very pointed about it. Do you feel confident in your work? Because right, they're smart kids. They know, so didn't want to dumb the questions down. So like, are you improving? Do you improve? But I think Ben tells a story about giving, if you tell the story about the questions after working with your researcher of asking the kids about how do you feel your writing's improving, and they were actually thinking about actual handwriting.
Yeah, so we worked for a year with on a 3-year project, and they're very esteemed, erudite academic researchers, but they hadn't realized that when they were having the conversations with the children, that a lot of the time the children thought they were talking about handwriting, not writing, because in school that was what they were being asked to improve, is their handwriting. So, you know, this whole issue around kind of language and terminology is massively, massively important in this stuff, particularly, you know, when there can be the people you're working with may have a different interpretation of what your meaning is and what you're looking for. I think it's one more slide for you, Gerald.
Yeah, so just about thinking about the data. We're so seamless on this, huh? So talking about using your data to tell the story and thinking about different ways to use the data. So one, as we talked about, you know, using a story about a participant. And sometimes, as we said, hearing from a person that is the beneficiary of your work is even better than us talking about it, right? So having someone talk about it, we would routinely, even if we could, have one of our young people talk to the funders directly, or having the funders, when they did a site visit, sit down and actually volunteer in the program to be able to talk to the kids seamlessly. Telling a story about how your organization helps to facilitate change, and talking about what you see before the work is done, or what you've been seeing from young people you work with, to what you see after at the end, and the change that you're seeing. And that helps with videos as well, because they can see in their own words, talking about how they feel that they're different and how they feel they're changing. And then a story about what you hope to achieve in the future. If you have a strategic plan, or if you're thinking about theory of change, it allows you to really think about future growth. This is what we hope the world will look like if we do our work. If we succeed in what we're doing, this is what the world will look like. This is what our participants will have. This is what they'll be able to do. So thinking about that story of future, of what you're doing in the future and what you hope the world will look like, is really important as well.
Thanks. And I just wanted to put this this case study up for you, because I think it kind of creates an interesting point in terms of our experience of ministry stories. So I mentioned the work with the academic researcher, which was based around a theory of change model. And one of the things that we wanted them to look at, one of our key criteria, was about were children that were coming to our programs actually doing better in school than children who weren't. So it was about improving educational attainment. And for various reasons, statistical and bureaucratic, it was very difficult for those evaluators to sort of demonstrate that impact. And yet we knew that we were having it, because we knew anecdotally from the schools and from the parents and the volunteers that this was happening. And so we began to be as smart as a muchin, basically, in trying to make sure that we were kind of gathering this data and telling these stories. So this is a sort of exemplar story of a child who went through our program over 2 years, went from quite a difficult place in their relationship with reading and writing, and then became a very confident writer and a confident young man. And the thing about this that I just wanted to say was that having the theory of change criteria meant that we knew what we were needing to look for. So that was really important. But also we had to do this retrospectively. And we realized that lots of volunteers and lots of people had had contact with Amuchin, but actually putting together his story backwards from having was a really massive job. Okay, so even though this is quite a short little example, actually putting this together to make sure that we'd got it right took a lot of time. And so it really speaks to this idea of like trying to get ahead of this and thinking about it proactively and planning it in so that you don't have to do it backwards, that you know what you're looking for, and you get everyone in the organization thinking and present about gathering this information, gathering these stories, and making sure that they're kind of recorded. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that as a sort of, a bit of a life lesson from trying to do this stuff in an organization. So you did your 1 minute exercise. In our longer workshop, we ask you to think about it, and we give you a sort of structured series of questions to think about. And you do this in 30 minutes, and then you do your pitch. So we asked you to do something a bit scary in this particular session. Don't feel that you have to write down these questions because we'll include them in the presentation. But these are the questions that we think are really important about talking about your impact. This idea about where you are in the story, maybe you're the founder or you work for the organization. It's a really important point to kind of talk about a little bit about yourself and about why this organization's mission is important to you personally and why you believe in it. Talking about what the problem is that you want to show, what's wrong in the world, and how does your work help to sort of address that or solve that. What's the key change that you want to highlight? So we talked about the difference between talking about change and not talking so much about all the different activities. So what's the change that you want to have? And then what are the key elements of the program that help to affect that change? Then there may be the opportunity to talk about some of these really key headline stats. Remember, you've only got a minute, or you might talk a little bit about a story of a beneficiary, somebody who's been through your programs as a way to illustrate that impact. And at the end, as we said, always have this idea of what your call to action is. So have an idea that you're inviting whoever you're talking to, what you want them to do with that information, how they could be involved as a volunteer, or how they can help you do more of your work by funding it, or what is it that you want them to be part of the change that you're bringing about. So does anybody have any questions? We haven't got a huge amount of time. In fact, we're slightly over time. Claire, are we all right to have questions?
We've got a couple more minutes and then we'll need to log into the plenary. So maybe just take a couple of quick questions.
If anybody's got any immediate questions, that would be great.
I'd like to know about what you guys cover in your full day course, if you don't mind.
Gerald, do you want to do that?
Sure. So in the telling your story with impact, we go into the quantitative data, we go into theory of change, deeply in the theory of change, talk more about we show you some of the surveys that we've used in the past.
Okay.
And go more deeply into that. And so it's two parts. So the first part of the session, we give you this exercise to do. So you get 30 minutes to go off and write your 1 minute pitch, and then come back and deliver it to the group, much what you did. And then the second part, we talk more about theory of change. And then I think the second half of it, we just started the second half recently, was you allowed to work with the group to talk about what you're all working on and get sort of a group share about how different people are using evaluation data, or what they're hoping to achieve, or what they're hoping to do, or what they could do.
And we also give you an imaginary charity to develop a theory of change for together. So we give you that as an exercise to work on. within the session.
And do people attend that independently on their charity, or like do people come in groups? Because I think that might be quite useful to come with a few people from your own charity.
Yeah, we've had sort of 2 or 3 people from the same charity coming on and doing it, and I think that's quite helpful because you get some different perspectives on this within the organisation. So it's quite a useful way of then taking that away and talking about it together. So yeah, that's definitely happened.
Thank you.
Okay, is that it? Are we sated with the questions?
I think if anyone else has any more questions, they can drop us a line and we can forward them on, or you know, we can manage any more questions, and we'll be sharing all of these slides and recordings of these sessions, so we can match up anyone who's got any more questions. And thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. I think, you know, the comments from everyone are just saying how great that was. So thank you so much, Ben and Gerald, for your time. Thanks everyone for contributing. That was it was so useful.
Thank you, everyone. That's great. I hope it was helpful.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.